There's a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. You wake up and you're already carrying it. Before you check your phone, before the first coffee, before you even fully remember what day it is, it's already there. In your shoulders. In that specific tightness that lives right between your shoulder blades and just doesn't leave. And the thing is, you're not in crisis. Nothing collapsed. Nothing is on fire. You're functioning. You're showing up. You're getting through the day. But there's this other thing happening, this quieter thing, where certain parts of your life have been in exactly the same shape for longer than you can easily explain. And if someone asked you why, you wouldn't have a clean answer. You'd probably say something like, "It's complicated," or "I'm working on it." And that wouldn't be a lie, but it wouldn't really be the truth either. I'm talking about 3 specific zones. The first one is money, or work, or both, because usually they're the same knot. There's a ceiling you've been bumping against for a while now. Not a disaster ceiling, just the same number showing up at the end of the month, the same conversations about rate or value or that thing you've been meaning to restructure for 2 years, maybe longer. The second one is a relationship, or a dynamic inside a relationship, that conversation you've been circling around, the way the same pattern keeps playing out, the version of things that both people have silently agreed to keep in place because renegotiating it would cost more energy than just maintaining it, which you do every day without talking about it. And the third one is your body. Not sick, not broken, just not really recovering. You sleep, but it doesn't fully land. You get through the day, but by a certain hour, the same hour pretty consistently, there's this drop, this familiar wall, and you've built your whole rhythm around working with it instead of asking what it actually is. 3 zones, none of them in crisis, all of them stuck in the same form they've been in for a long time. And here's what I want to say before we get into anything else, before we talk about what's happening in the sky, or why this week is different, or what's actually about to shift. This is not a character flaw. It's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's not because you lack discipline. It's not some story about self-sabotage you need to unpack in therapy. The reason these 3 things have been holding the same shape is structural. And structure isn't personal, but it also doesn't stay permanent. If all 3 of those zones have been sitting in the same place for roughly the same stretch of time, the same ceiling, the same dynamic, the same fatigue pattern, that's not a coincidence. That's not just life. Something has been holding that shape in place, a real mechanism, with a real architecture. And if it's a mechanism, then it can also reach a moment where the mechanism changes. That's what this video's about, not the tiredness. The reason it's been so consistent, and what's different about right now. So let's talk about why. Because if you've been walking around with some version of, "I should have changed this already," that quiet, low-grade guilt about the ceiling that hasn't moved, or the dynamic you haven't addressed, or the way your body's been running on fumes for longer than feels acceptable, I want to offer you something more accurate than that story. Here's the thing about the last several years, and I'm talking about a real stretch of time, not a rough patch, not a bad season. A multi-year cycle where the ground underneath material life was actively being restructured. The rules around what's stable, what holds value, what you can actually build on, all of that has been shifting in the background since around 2018, 2019. Slowly, continuously. In ways most people couldn't fully name because nothing dramatic happened. It just got progressively harder to make a clean move. And that matters. Because if the foundation is shifting, any structure you try to build on top of it is going to feel unstable. So what do most people do? They wait. They maintain what already exists. They keep the ceiling functional, because renegotiating it feels risky when you don't know what solid ground looks like yet. That's not fear. That's actually a reasonable response to an unreliable surface. The problem is, you can't always see that from the inside. From the inside, it just feels like you're not moving. And not moving very easily becomes a story about you. About your hesitation, your timing, your inability to just commit to the thing. But the ceiling on your income wasn't there because you undervalued yourself. It was there because the cost of repositioning, financially, logistically, emotionally, kept coming out higher than the cost of staying put. And staying put is what you did, because the math said to. Same thing with the relationship pattern. That conversation you've been circling for months, maybe longer. It wasn't just avoidance. It was the weight of what reopening it would require. Energy you didn't have, a structure that didn't have room for renegotiation without something else falling apart. So the dynamic stayed. Same shape, same quiet friction, same unspoken agreement to keep the floor where it was. And your body? Same mechanism. When everything else is in maintenance mode, the body follows. It doesn't get worse, it just stops getting better. You hit a functional baseline and you run along it. The same drop at the same hour. The same sleep that doesn't fully restore. The body doing exactly what a system does when the system has no room to expand. It holds the line. Now here's the other layer this week adds to that. Right now, on top of that long background pressure, there's a cluster of energy in the sky that's basically pushing on the accelerator while the road is still foggy. The drive to act, to cut through, to force clarity, it's real. You've probably felt it over the last few days as a kind of edginess, like something needs to happen, but you're not quite sure what. That tension between wanting to move and not seeing a clean path forward, that's not confusion. That's the exact signature of this moment. The friction is real. The fog is real. But neither one of them is permanent. And what matters, what actually changes what's possible, isn't the pressure. It's what's about to move underneath the pressure. If the structure itself shifts, the cost calculation changes. Not the size of the step, the cost of taking it. That's the actual mechanism, and the mechanism is about to change. So let's get specific. Because this is where most astrology content gets vague, and I don't want to do that. There's an exact threshold here, not a season, not a vibe shift, an actual line, in time, in degree, where the mechanism we've been talking about crosses from one set of rules into another. It happens tomorrow night, late, around the time most people are winding down, maybe already in bed. And what happens is this. A planet that's been moving through the same zone of the sky since 2018, 7 years, takes its final step out of that territory. 1 degree, the last degree, and then it's gone. Into new ground, for the next several decades. Now, before that, actually the day before, which is tomorrow daytime for most people, something quieter happens first. Venus moves into new territory ahead of it. And that matters because Venus is fast. Venus is contact, connection, the way things feel when you reach toward them. So the first signal isn't the big structural shift. The first signal is a softening, a slight change in how something feels when you touch it, a conversation that goes slightly easier than expected, a number that looks different when you look at it fresh, a moment where something you've been holding at arm's length suddenly doesn't feel as heavy to hold. That's the signal. Pay attention to that because it arrives first, and then, the night after, that's the confirmation. That's when the structural layer shifts, when it's not just a feeling but an actual change in what's possible. The architecture underneath those 3 frozen zones, the one that made movement cost more than stillness, that architecture crosses a line. New rules, new ground, new cost calculation. Here's what that actually means in plain terms. That income ceiling you've been bumping against, it stops being structural. It was never just about your rate or your offer or your confidence. Part of what held it in place was a larger framework around material stability that made repositioning genuinely risky. That framework is moving. The ceiling doesn't disappear, but it stops being load-bearing. The relationship dynamic, the one running on the same unspoken rules, gets a small but real crack of light in it. Not a crisis, not a confrontation, just a moment where the thing that needed to be said becomes slightly more sayable than it was yesterday. And your body. The body is usually the last to get the memo, but it also tells the truth. In the next couple of days, there's likely to be a signal, not a dramatic one, where your body gives you information that's more precise than the general fatigue you've been running on. Not, I'm exhausted, in that vague, ongoing way. Something more specific, something that points at a particular thing rather than just everything at once. That Specificity is the shift. That's what threshold energy feels like when it's real. Not a lightning bolt, not a revelation, not some overwhelming sense of clarity. Just things getting slightly more legible. The signal gets cleaner. And the reason that matters is this. For the last several years, the signal was always muddy. You'd feel the pull to change something, but you couldn't fully read where to go. The direction was foggy. The cost felt unclear. So you waited, you maintained, you kept the form that already existed because at least that form was known. What changes now is not your courage, it's not your mindset. It's that the signal clears. The fog that's been sitting on direction, particularly around work, around a specific relationship dynamic, around what your body actually needs, starts to thin. And when the signal clears, the decision that felt impossible starts to feel obvious, not dramatic, not sudden, just obvious. That's the threshold. And it's crossing right now, over the next couple of nights. I want to stay on this for a second, because there's something that usually doesn't get said in this kind of content, and it needs to be said clearly. The zones that haven't moved, the income ceiling, the relationship dynamic, the body that's functioning but not recovering, they weren't frozen because you were afraid. Or not primarily. They were frozen because moving them carried a cost that was genuinely disproportionate to what the move would return. Think about that for a second. Think about the last time you seriously considered raising your rate or restructuring how you work. There was a moment, probably more than one, where you ran the math, not on paper, but in your body, and it came out wrong. Too much exposure, too much uncertainty, too much to reorganize for a result that wasn't guaranteed. So you kept the ceiling where it was, not because you didn't know it was a ceiling, because the price of lifting it felt higher than the cost of staying under it. That's not a psychology problem. That's an accurate read of a bad cost structure. Same thing with the conversation you've been not having. You know the one. The thing that keeps getting moved to next week. It's not that you don't know what you want to say. It's that saying it opens something, requires energy, requires follow-through, requires the other person to respond in a way you can't control. And right now, with everything else already at capacity, the budget for that isn't there. So it stays in the drawer. Another week, same drawer. And your body runs that same calculation constantly. Every time your nervous system could choose recovery, it checks the available resources first. And if the resources are already allocated to maintaining the income structure, to managing the relationship tension, to just getting through the work week, there's nothing left for actual restoration. The body doesn't fail. It just stops getting better. Because getting better costs something, and the account is always just slightly short. This is the economy of a frozen life. Not dramatic, not a breakdown, just permanently just under the threshold of what real movement would require. And here's the non-obvious part. The part that most people never quite land on. When this starts to shift, it doesn't feel like courage arriving. It doesn't feel like you finally found the motivation or the clarity or the right mindset. It feels like something getting cheaper. That's it. The decision that was too expensive last month suddenly has a different price tag. You reach toward it, and there's less resistance than you expected. You think about sending the message, and you notice the internal tax on it is lower than it was. You look at the number, your rate, your budget, whatever it is, and the feeling of I can't has been quietly replaced by something more like, wait, why not? That's not a mood shift. That's structural. The architecture underneath the cost calculation changed, and when the architecture changes, the prices change with it. So over the next few days, pay less attention to whether you feel ready. Ready is a story. Pay attention to where the resistance has gone quiet. Pay attention to which decision out of the 3 zones has stopped feeling as heavy to hold. Because that's the first real signal. It won't announce itself. It won't feel like a revelation. It'll feel like, oh, that's it? That's all that was holding that in place? And the answer mostly is yes. That's all it was. A cost structure that made stillness cheaper than movement for years, until now. The cost changed. That's the whole thing. That's the mechanism. And once you see that, once you stop reading your own history as a character flaw and start reading it as an accurate response to a real structural problem, Something else happens too. The self-blame lifts. Not all at once, but enough. Enough that the next decision has a little more room to breathe. And once that cost drops, you start to see exactly where it already has. So let's land this somewhere real. Because everything we've talked about, the cost structure, the frozen zones, the threshold crossing over the next couple of nights, none of it means anything if you can't feel it in your actual week, in your actual schedule, in the actual conversation you've been avoiding, or the actual number you haven't looked at in a while. So let's go zone by zone. Money, work, the ceiling. The first sign here isn't a windfall. It's not a new client showing up out of nowhere or some sudden opportunity that solves everything. The first sign is quieter than that. It's a moment where you look at your rate, or your price, or your contract, or whatever the specific form your ceiling takes, and the number stops looking like a wall. It just starts looking like a number. Editable, negotiable, not final. That might happen in a conversation. Someone asks what you charge, and the answer that comes out of your mouth is slightly higher than the one you've been defaulting to. Not planned, not prepared, just different. And it doesn't feel as terrifying as it should. That's the signal. That's the ceiling losing its structural authority. Or it might be even quieter than that. You open a spreadsheet you haven't touched in 2 months. You look at one line item and you think, actually, no, that's not right anymore. Small, practical, real. Relationships, communication, the dynamic. This one tends to show up as something getting said that's been sitting unsaid. Not a fight, not a big confrontation. Actually, the opposite. The thing that felt like it would require a whole production to say turns out to take about 30 seconds. You say it in the kitchen, or in a text, or in that half-awake moment before sleep when the filter is down. And it lands. Maybe not perfectly, but it lands. And you notice, that was it? That's all that was holding that in the drawer. Or maybe it's something someone says to you. A thing you weren't expecting to hear from someone you weren't expecting to hear it from. A small correction in the dynamic. A moment where the usual pattern breaks. Not dramatically, just doesn't repeat the way it always does. Watch for the first conversation in the next few days where something shifts that you thought was permanent. It probably won't feel significant in the moment. It'll feel almost anticlimactic. That's how you know it's real. Body, energy, recovery. This one is the most physical and also the most precise. The first sign here isn't that you suddenly feel great. It's that your body sends you a more specific message than usual. Instead of the general, ambient exhaustion, the one that lives everywhere and nowhere, you get something pointed. A specific tension, a specific hour, a specific thing that's actually the source. Maybe you wake up and you realize the shoulder tension you've been carrying for months is directly connected to a specific thing on your schedule. Not vague stress, an actual item, an actual pattern. And now that you can see it, you can touch it, you can change it. Or the afternoon drop, that same wall at the same hour, shows up, and instead of just pushing through it the way you always do, you do something different. You stop for 20 minutes, and it actually works. The body responds, not because you became disciplined, but because there's slightly more room in the system now. The maintenance load is fractionally lighter, and the body knows it before you do. 3 zones, 3 first signs, none of them dramatic, all of them real. And here's the thing about this window, the stretch between now and the full moon about a week and a half out. This is not the time for grand plans. This is not the time to redesign your whole life or have every conversation at once. This is the time to notice where one thing, just one, has already started to move. Because one thing moving is everything. After years of the same shape, one thing moving is the proof that the structure changed. You don't need a revelation. You just need to notice the first obvious thing that didn't used to be obvious. It's probably already there. You might have already felt it today and dismissed it as a fluke. It wasn't a fluke. So here's how I'd hold this next stretch. Not as a window of transformation, not as a special few days where you need to do something meaningful or you'll miss it. Just as a period where you pay closer attention to a specific thing, one thing. Where is the resistance lower than it was? That's the whole protocol. That's it. Not what should I do and not what's coming for me. Just where, in the 3 zones we've talked about, does something feel cheaper to reach toward than it did a week ago? Because here's what tends to happen after a structural shift like this. People either try to act on everything at once. Finally, the energy is here. Let's restructure the income and have the hard conversation and fix the sleep schedule all in the same week. And they exhaust themselves and nothing sticks. Or they do the opposite. They wait for a sign so clear and so dramatic that it's impossible to miss. And the sign comes, quiet and obvious, and they dismiss it as a fluke. Neither of those is the move. The move is to track the quieter decision, the one that shows up without fanfare, the one where you notice, oh, I'm not fighting that anymore. I thought I would be. But I'm not. Maybe it's that you write a number down, a rate, a price, a target, and you don't immediately want to cross it out. That's a signal. Maybe it's that you pick up your phone to send a message you've been drafting in your head for weeks. And this time, you actually send it. Not because you planned to, just because it was suddenly easier than not sending it. That's a signal. Maybe it's that you go to sleep 20 minutes earlier than usual, just one night. And you wake up and something is slightly different in how the day starts, not transformed, just there's a little more room in it. That's a signal. These are not revelations, they're not breakthroughs, they're data points, small, physical, real. And they're exactly what the period between now and the full moon is designed to produce. That full moon, it lands in Scorpio about a week and a half from now. And Scorpio doesn't deal in ambiguity. It deals in what's actually true underneath the version of things you've been maintaining. Which means by the time that moon is full, the first consequences of this shift are going to be visible. Not as some cosmic event, as decisions that already happened, as a conversation that already changed something, as a number that already moved. And you'll be able to look back at this window, these next several days, and see exactly where it started. So the only real thing to do right now is this. Don't chase the revelation. Don't force the clarity. Don't try to manufacture the moment. Just notice where the space is already cleared. Because that's the actual form this shift takes, not a clear path, a cleared space. The frozen structure didn't hand you a map, it just stopped being in the way. What you do with that space, that's yours. But the space is real, and it's there now in a way it wasn't before. Something has a different weight now, not lighter, but more honest. The zones that were frozen weren't frozen because of your choices. They were frozen because the structure holding them made any movement cost more than the stillness. That structure shifted. The cost changed. What remains isn't a clear path, it's a cleared space. Between now and that full moon in Scorpio, the first visible consequences of this shift start arriving. Not as revelations, as decisions that feel quieter than expected and more obvious than they should be. If one of the 3 zones is already clarifying for you, money, relationship, or body, leave it in the comments. Not as a wish, as a fact.